Welcome to Dungeon Mastering is Easy. This is the show that shows that anyone can be a dungeon master. It's great to have you with us. My name's Vahid. I'm the host of the show, and today we've got Logan Laidlaw with us, back for the second round. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing great. Heck, I'm feeling on top of the world right now.
Awesome. Logan is the producer of Nat19, which is a very popular Twitch and YouTube Dungeons & Dragons channel. He's also a very successful world builder. On Kickstarter, with a handful of projects, he has generated through backers hundreds of thousands of dollars with thousands of backers with amazing third-party content. So good to have you back with us, Logan.
It's very good to be back, and I'm really excited for today's topic.
Oh, me too. This is one of my personal favorite topics at the moment, which is why dungeons are good.
And they are.
But dungeons have kind of fallen out of favor.
Yeah, they really have. Most pre-written adventures by official sources, wizards and whatnot, still try to include the occasional dungeon, and they're still usually pretty fun. But in games that are more narrative-based, they tend to fall out of favor. Like high-end streaming shows, I won't name any specific ones, they usually use set pieces as opposed to dungeons. And there's a lot of merit to that. You don't always need dungeons. But dungeons are falling out of the zeitgeist. People... And we'll get into why I think that is, unless we want to just start with that.
Do it, bro. Start it. Hit it.
The reasons I think dungeons are falling out of favor. And why I think that we need to protect them, that they're endangered, and we need to put a little fence up around them.
Cute.
The reason I think they're falling out of favor is that they require a lot of prep time compared to big set-piece encounters. It's a lot easier to be like, the encounter with the dragon on the twin crag peaks, than to be like, okay, I'm going to make my 2-story dungeon with traps and rooms and make my maps. It's a lot more on the GM to make dungeons these days. I think another reason is... They used to be like the beer and chips process of I get my 10-foot pole, I go in, I poke around with my stick. I assume that I'm touching everything before we do anything. The rogue had a very specific purpose in older editions, and that the rogue was like, I'm the guy that stops the spike wall. That's what I do. I can find them. The mechanics behind traps and such have been streamlined in such a way that they're more like skill checks for the party. They're like, oh, you didn't see it? Prepare to take 4d10 damage, as opposed to, you didn't see it? Death.
You're dead. You're just dead.
You're gone. Someone fell down a hole and they're not coming back. And also, I think that a lot of people want to do faction stuff. A lot of people want highly motivated antagonists and whatnot. And if you have a castle with a Dark Lord in it, you have to structure an entire castle. And you need to have, guards. And you need to imagine how they're moving around in it and how they're, doing their watches and who their minions are. I think it's just a lot of work that GMs don't necessarily feel like they get a lot out of these days. So I think that for those reasons, dungeons are slipping away. People would rather be like, I'm going to plan 4 or 5 rooms, and those are the rooms you go through. Like, we're going to pretend we're in a giant castle, but realistically, I have 4 maps.
Yeah.
It's
and the whole
fine.
The whole 5-room dungeon became a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you say, all right, you guys going into a dungeon, and there's a formula. The first one is the guard. The next is the skill test. Then there's the environment, blah, 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 and finish, the sub boss. And then there's the big battle. There's a whole thing around 5-room dungeons where you say you're going into a dungeon, but really you have 4 or 5 encounter maps lined up that you can just pull up on your VTT or whatever, but it's not the same.
Yeah. It's not the same as having an expansive multi-floor map that as you explore it with your group, you're like, okay, guys, so today each square on the map is actually 15 feet because we need the space. And just building this interconnected labyrinth of rooms that people explore.
Yeah.
Because that at my core, that's what I always want to do. Admittedly, I use set pieces a lot, but it's partially because I stream. And that's another thing I think. I think that streaming culture and streamed games don't lend themselves to constant dungeons very well because
No.
they slow down the narrative.
Indeed. And before you move off of that point,
Yes.
I think that that's a massive reason why anyone that's coming new into Dungeons and Dragons off of streams will be approaching it from a narrative story-based, as opposed to... So I like to think of it as, broadly speaking, there's plot-based or location-based. And of course, it's not as simple as that, but plot point-based versus, and most shows, stream shows are plot point-based scenes, because that's more interesting for an audience.
Yeah.
As opposed to a dungeon, which is a location-based and has usually a more linear storyline, and it's harder to show on shows. So people that are, if they've come into Dungeons and Dragons through watching shows, that's their expectation of what Dungeons and Dragons is.
Yeah, so like I get it. I understand why, but I want to talk about why dungeons are fun and important and why they're still good to have. Where do you, I've talked a bunch. Where do you sit on that? Why do you think dungeons are important?
Okay, like I think that dungeons have huge value especially for newer dungeon masters. If you are, as you've said, creating a dungeon takes time. It's fun, but it takes time. But as a dungeon master, if you can pick up a short adventure or a module which is dungeon-based, it's actually much easier to run.
Yeah.
For example, Keep on the Borderlands, which was a module back in the old days. The entire module is 24 pages. Curse of Strahd is 260 pages.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just a lot easier to run. Anyway, that's the first point. But please, you share what your thoughts.
I fully agree with that. I kind of want to bounce off that too, in that especially dungeons are a great learning tool for GMs because you can be like, okay, I don't fully understand how this type of thing works or how traps work. So being able to be like, this hallway, if they go into it, is going to be my chance to make sure I understand it, to run it. And then if it doesn't work, it's gone. And it's not the whole day, you know? I didn't have the whole day planned around this trap room. So it's a good chance to be like, each of these is going to be an experiment. And it also teaches structure because when you're making a map, usually you're like, each room should be its own isolated event. So each one is its own safe opportunity to practice building an encounter, whether it be a trap or a fight or a storytelling element. But also, you mentioned that the story in dungeons is linear. And I agree with that functionally, because when you're making a dungeon, you kind of have to consider like, okay, I have to tell the whole story in the beginning and the end and the middle. I have to assume they might miss everything. But when you're making a dungeon, one thing it gives you that plot and scene-based storytelling doesn't is that you can have entire rooms that are dedicated to optional environmental storytelling. You can... if you're in a dungeon where the big bad of the dungeon is a necromancer, I'm just going to pull from some stuff we're doing, a necromancer whose whole thing is that he lost his family and he is into necromancy because he wants to find a solution to eternal, unyielding life. So he's been doing experiments to not just make undead, but perfect undead that are replicas of real life. Then you can have your encounter with him. You can bump into him in your graveyard and you can be like, stop, you pervert life. I'm a paladin. Have at ye with my blade. Or with a dungeon, you can have him at the end, but you can have empty rooms where his family once lived with notes left by them. You could have a room that is like an operating table where there's like discarded corpses of failed attempts to create idealized undead. You can have his failed experiments or show a progression of these were the earlier ones that you encounter early on in the dungeon, but as you get deeper, you bump into ones that are more animate and more sapient. And like you can use environmental storytelling to build a journey from both that represents the place and the bad guy so that when you get to him, you know them a bit more because it's always more satisfying to beat up someone you know.
That's a quote.
It's true, though. That's one of the reasons why Curse of Strahd works so well, is because the entire journey around Barovia is learning about him. So when you finally get him, you're like, you're sad. And I know why. Die.
Yeah.
But,
I mean, there's a tangent there's a tangent there, a whole another episode around how to introduce BBEGs in a way that throughout a campaign but we're not going to deal with that. But this is a very interesting side point that you want the BBEG not to be saved exclusively for the end. They need to be interwoven. But anyway, Keep going. The Captives of Doligan is a new Dungeons & Dragons adventure for 5th edition. It's a race against time to save your friends from raiders before they're gone forever. It's a 4-session adventure for characters leveled 1 to 3 and is full of challenging combat, skill, and role-playing encounters, as well as opponents that no one in your group has ever seen before. It features tips and tricks for new dungeon masters to get right into the action and is available as both a physical and digital book. Head to Kickstarter now to get your copy of The Captives of Doligan.
Especially in mid-2010s video games. I know this is going to seem like a wild tangent, that statement. Things like BioShock, I guess that's not 2010s, but things like BioShock and whatnot really rely upon audio diaries. Like there's lots of video games where you'll be exploring, you'll pick up an audio diary, you'll listen to it as you do stuff in the environment. That type of storytelling is not doable in TTRPGs, in scene-based stories. But in a dungeon, you can leave notes and books and short things around and you can plan for moments like whenever you know that whenever a party walks by a room, you can be like, as you guys go, whoever's in front or has the highest passive perception or whatever, you can be like, as you pass it, you hear muffled voices from the other side, 2 disparaged guards speaking, and you could have to describe one being like, I'm not sure what the boss is up to. He's been a bit erratic lately. Well, that is ever since he came back from the ruins, innit? Like, you can have those moments of brief, you overhear things. You hear other people talking. Yes. And those are... There's alternates to them in scene-based storytelling, but you can't find somebody's diary on the road. And also, when you structure, like, the 5-room dungeon where the players kind of know they're just going through the line... Finding things like that feels like you've dropped it in front of them to force it on them, whereas if they feel like they randomly happenstance their way into their hidden shrine in their dungeon, they feel like, I found a thing that might be useful that maybe we weren't supposed to find. Yeah. And that's a different experience. Yeah. Like, I'm rambling. Strahd's Castle is like one of my favorite dungeons. I think there's a reason Curse of Strahd is like the most successful Wizards campaign. His castle, if you get into it, has everything in its missable. Everything. All the stuff. But you can find like his family's tomb. You can find like the vault where there's 50 different vaults to open that each tell their own little story. You can find the heart, literally beating heart of the castle. You can find the hags that live upstairs. Excuse me. There's so much environmental storytelling that informs the campaign and the big bad that you can't just get by having him drop in and be like, oh, you believe that you were going to defeat me. Well, here's my sad backstory and I've summoned a rock. Die. And then he poofs out. Like, you can't deliver some stuff that way.
Yeah, so I really like this point that you've made is awesome, that you can, this idea of being able to tell the story through the character's exploration of dropping story breadcrumbs in the murals they see on the wall, in the books that are open in the library, in the operating chamber, in the ghostly remains of 2 people talking, caught in a time loop through, this idea of, and anyone that does writing seriously knows that you show, not tell, right? And a dungeon allows you in a very compact way to show rather than telling.
Yep. No.
And the players feel, they go, oh, they're putting together the pieces of a puzzle while they do that. And they go, oh, remember that other thing that happened? I bet the operation was that guy there.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly what, like bumping into notes about hacking a character and like briefly saying their name, and then on the next floor down in the dungeon, encountering them as a bottleneck boss towards something important is like very satisfying. People resonate with it. It doesn't even need to mean anything. Like, it doesn't need to mechanically change anything. Players resonate with the moments of discovery, and many types of moments of discovery are only available in dungeons or structured buildings that have a certainty to them, because it's all like the difference between theater of a mind combat and map combat. Both have their benefits. Map combat feels more invested because there is the sense of everything is where it is and there are rules. Theater of the mind can be fun, but if you cast Fireball on a map, you're I get these guys. Like, I earned it. We set that up. I got them into that circle. We got them. If you do a theater of the mind, you have like GM, are they in that space? And the GM, depending on how they
arbitrarily figures it out.
Yeah. And like both are good, but both have different emotional payoffs. It's like, because in one case, you're like, oh, the GM was being nice to me because he thought it'd be cool. And the other, it's like, we set that up. We did that. And similar moments happen in exploration that is truly untethered versus a GM just telling you what you walk through in a scene-based location.
Yeah.
And the other main thing I think that Dungeons get across, because that's ultimately my main thing, is environmental storytelling. Dungeons are the best mode for giving random treasure to parties. Scene-based stuff, you're limited to what people drop or what cool artifacts are on scene. Dungeons, you can walk into a room.
Or what, or what a benefactor gives you, right? Like, you've just done this wonderful thing for me. Have this family heirloom. I don't know why I'm giving it to you, but I think you need a magical item. I don't know why. Yeah.
You safely brought my caravan here. Have my family's sword for some reason.
Exactly.
No, it's stuff like discovering and unlocking a treasure vault that has a password you need to find elsewhere in the dungeon. That doesn't organically exist in scene-based storytelling. Also, the idea of, I don't know, you guys, if you went into this room, you would have found like the bound beholder that this big bad subjugated, and it can, like, it's guarding a scroll of a 9th level spell or something. That the challenge is, if you do this, it'll be hard, but you'll get the cool thing. But you don't have to do this. It might kill you. This isn't necessary. Again, players resonate with that because they like feeling like, I did this. This was my, I opted to do this.
Yeah.
And also stuff like keys. Locked doors are meaningless in linear dungeons, being like, you bump into a vault door, it requires like a special like ring that acts as a key. That in a linear dungeon, that becomes, okay, well, then we need to backtrack and the GM will probably hit us with it. In a dungeon, it becomes are we even supposed to go in here? Is there like an obscure drawer in this place? And it causes them to look harder at everything. Like stuff like that. And you can also drop slightly unbalanced treasure in a dungeon because you don't know if people will find it. So that when people are like, oh, I opened a drawer and there was 3 potions of speed in there, and I don't know if these were intended, but that's the boss battle. Yeah. Whereas if you drop 3 potions of speed in front of people in a linear encounter, it's kind of like, oh, the GM's telling us that something's going to get wild, you know?
One of the things that you've just mentioned, which I think is interesting, is that something that people that do a lot of computer gaming will often come across is, to get through this door, you need to pick up that, and that, right? You need 3 ingredients. Maybe it's the key. Maybe it's 3 bits that form together to make a key, right? That's a lot more compact to do in a dungeon than in a scene-based narrative story where you're going through a forest or you're going, whereas in a dungeon, it's really easy to do that kind of payoff where, they come across a locked door and it has a weird key, and then they figure out, oh, that's what that thing back there was, so things like that, those kind of puzzles are really good. And also traps for dungeons, there's a reason why it's called Dungeons and Dragons, because dungeons are just cool. Anyway.
Yep. It's also with non-linear dungeons, you can. One of the main campaigns of our main Nat 19 story was this. I'm reticent to call it a dread plane because I don't like to use broad terminology, but it was a dread plane. And in it, there was this lich dancer woman who was like self-obsessed, used illusion magic to make herself look not undead. She sapped energy from people by dancing and performing in front of them. She was cool. But she had a dungeon that was this massive area that had like a theater in it and her personal chambers in it and a prison in it. But at the main entrance to it, there was a statue of her that is just right front and center, that after exploring it for a while, the players realized that her phylactery was in it, that she was so vain that she just put her phylactery inside this statue that is the first thing they see in the dungeon.
Yeah, cool.
That only works if you have an entire dungeon to explore, so people get the sense of, oh, that's just set dressing. They explore and find it out. In linear storytelling, you'd kind of have that probably in the middle, have an indication of that's where it is 2 rooms down, and then have to come back to it.
Yeah.
But I got to have the moment of like, here's clues as to where it is. Oh, and it turns out to be the first thing you saw, but they had to figure that out.
Yeah,
like,
that's a great Chekhov's gun, isn't it? Awesome.
Yeah, and there's no right way to do it. But dungeons lend themselves to player discovery and the moment of someone's face lighting up when they're like, oh, Yeah. And I live for that. I love that so much.
Making dungeons is such something that I'm so keen on that the Dice Legenz, our company, Dice Legenz, is actually starting to make some dungeon-based adventures, like 4 to 5 session dungeon adventures that will still have a fun story that has enough plot in it that characters will feel emotionally invested in it. Because I just think that they're fun. A lot of players that I know say, "Oh, I've never done a dungeon before. That sounds fun." They're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but they've never done a dungeon. They go, "Oh!" Yeah. And they get excited by the idea. So I think there's a market for it. And for new dungeon masters, you learn the skills of the trade. One of those skills, like that rules, how to do fights, interweaving simple narrative. And, I think it's just the best way for dungeon masters to get started.
Yep. It's such a, you said it earlier, but it bears repeating. It's such a safe way for people to learn to play D&D because you only need to think about one room at a time. And if something doesn't pop off, if you do a rule wrong or something in a moderately well-built dungeon, you will do it, get in there, maybe foible it, and then move on to whatever the next thing is and maybe get another chance. Whereas if that was one of your 3 big story beats, messing it up feels a whole lot worse and might do future things. But the room where there's 4 hobgoblins hanging out that is kind of just a combat encounter that maybe guards a neat item but has no story relevance, that's time to mess up and learn.
Yeah, I love it.
Useful.
Hey, this has been really cool, Logan. I think the stuff that you shared about story through exploration and how that's, in a compact area within a dungeon is so much easier to achieve. And you can do that in such an easier and more fulfilling way than in plot or story beat narrative. I think that's really great. And all the other things that you mentioned about, sure, it might take more prep time to make them, but, there are other aspects that are easier to run. Really helpful. Hey, we're going to finish off our episode with it's not really a challenge, but it's one of our regular segments called Tools of the Trade, where we discuss what kind of tools, what kind of things do you use to run your games?
Cool.
So, what do you use? What do you do?
We're actually affiliated with Fantasy Grounds, which is a very useful tool. We have been using it for a long, long time, since classic days, and it's a really good VTT. It's also, not that I don't get anything for saying this, but it also recently went license free, so Fantasy Grounds is free now. You have to still buy the books and modules and content, but they did away with their licenses. So you can now just pick it up and anybody can run it and anybody can be the GM in it. It has a good 3D camera mode for online stuff. And once you get used to the syntax of how to work in it, which is something you have to do for any VTT, I find it really good. Beyond that...
And what do you do, sorry if you don't mind me interrupting, in terms of keeping track of notes for your campaign and your stories, what tools do you use for that?
Fantasy Grounds has individual story and note sections in it that I tend to write stuff in, though usually, Google Docs it's a boring answer, but usually I make all my preliminary notes for things in Google Docs. making use of its tabs function for different stuff, and then I'll transfer it into there. But again, Fantasy Grounds has collapsible story, note, and encounter and dungeon functions that you can use to keep track of information in different ways. So I'm sort of all in on Fantasy Grounds. It's
awesome.
I want to learn Foundry. I've heard really good things about Foundry, but I've been using FG for so long that I'm sort of trapped.
Cool. Hey, Logan, thanks so much for joining us. It's been really helpful. I'm sure that all of us have gained some really fun and easy insights and tips. Can you tell people how they can connect with you?
Okay, you can find me personally on Twitter/X under The Azure Crow, or just search Logan Laidlaw. Most places you can search Nat19Official. If you want to find us on Twitch, we stream every Saturday except the first Saturday of each month on twitch.tv/Nat19Official, 19 as in the numbers, not spelled out. And let's see. And if you want to visit our website, where you can aggregate out to everything else, nat19show.com.
Wonderful. Thanks, Logan. It's been really cool having you with us.
Oh, I had so much fun. Thank you so much.
And if you want to support Dungeon Mastering is Easy or the Dice Legenz channel in general, head over to our Patreon page. It's easy, patreon.com/Dice Legenz. You can follow for free. It doesn't cost you a penny. There are also a handful of simple tiers of ways that you can support our channel financially to help the lights stay on and keep things moving. And to our patrons that are already on there, thanks for all the support you've given us over the years. All right, guys, we'll catch you next time. And remember, Dungeon Mastering is easy. Pick up some dice, get a group together, and have some fun. See ya!